Turning Point USA held its first America Fest conference without, of course, the late Charlie Kirk. And there was some controversy over the stage time that was given to political commentator Tucker Carlson regarding a number of issues, but including, I guess, highlighted with an interview he had earlier in the year with Holocaust denier Nick Fuentes. Now, we're not going to be covering that directly today, but it is worth noting because we certainly have seen a growing divide among conservatives, including Christian conservatives for that matter, over support for Israel. And so we wanted to tackle that today with my next guest. And joining me now for this discussion is Dr. Gerald McDermott. He teaches at the Jerusalem Seminary and Reformed Episcopal Seminary in Philadelphia. And he's written and co-authored a number of books, including Understanding the Jewish Roots of Christianity. Also, Israel Matters, How Christians Must Think Differently About the People and the Land. Dr. McDermott, welcome back to Washington Watch. It's always great to have you with us.
Well, thank you, Congressman. It's my pleasure to be here.
Well, listen, I know that Tony had you on after Tucker Carlson made some of those remarks, critical remarks regarding Christian Zionism. So why don't we just start there? What is specifically Christian Zionism?
Well, Christian Zionism is the Christian belief that Jews have a right to a homeland, and in fact, that the land of Israel goes back 4,000 years. Jews have always lived there, and that God has given the land of the Canaanites to the Jewish people. So Christian Zionism, there's a movement called the New Christian Zionism, and a book by that title that I edited, in which a number of us scholars go into great detail showing that this is not simply an Old Testament promise that is repeated, by the way, 1,000 times in the Old Testament, but it's also a New Testament promise. It shows up all over the New Testament, that the authors of the New Testament also held to this land promise that God had given the land of the Canaanites to the descendants of Abraham, and specifically to the Jewish descendants of Abraham.
Interesting. So we are watching these days many Christians who are willing to say that God committed to the people of Israel, but at the same time, as you're bringing up right here, this whole topic that many of them are wary of connecting the modern return to the land to biblical expectations. Why is that? Why are we seeing this shift among a good number of Christians?
Congressman, I think we're seeing the switch because people don't read the Bible. You know, even evangelicals who claim to be all about the Bible don't read the Bible typically. If you read the Bible, and especially the Old Testament, which, by the way, is 77% of the Protestant Bible and 80% of the Anglican and Catholic Bible, you see the land promise all over the place. It's repeated 1,000 times. But most Christians have been told from the pulpit or in their college New Testament class or their university New Testament class that the land promise is not in the New Testament. I was told that even in my PhD studies. But then about 25 years ago, I had a wake-up call, and I started to realize that the land promise, I started to see that the land promise is actually all over the New Testament. So Christians need to get back to reading the Bible. They need to get off these podcasts by Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes and Candace Owens, which are full of lies and absolute falsehoods.
What do you think is behind that? What is the motive behind this transition?
Well, I think in part it's anti-Semitism, the old serpent-led anti-Semitism. The devil, I believe in the devil. I'm one of those university PhDs who actually believes in the devil. The devil is very much alive. And the devil knows that the Jewish people are God's chosen people. That's not the same thing as as being saved necessarily, but God has chosen the Jewish people to be a light to the nations, and Jesus as the Messiah to be the perfect light to focus the Jewish truth um, for the sake of the rest of the world. And so it's no surprise that the devil has inspired every major civilization to destroy the Jews because they are God's chosen people. So I think that's that anti-Semitism and is really behind this denial of the fact that the Bible promises, and even the New Testament, that the land of the Canaanites God gave to the Jewish people.
So it really does boil down to a spiritual battle, a spiritual warfare against the people of Israel. Is that what you're saying?
I think it does, Congressman. It's a spiritual battle that we're in. Most Christians who really want to follow the Lord recognize that. They sense that this world is enveloped in a massive spiritual battle, and our churches are
Yes, they are.
Are often the center of this spiritual battle.
Dr. McDermott, I'd like, if you would, stay with us over the break. I want to continue this discussion, and when we come back, I want to get into the Christian Zionism a little bit more and have you unpack that. Thanks so much for staying over. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're certainly welcome.
All right, I wanted to get in more and let you unpack a little bit more of this whole concept of Christian Zionism. Can you kind of unpack that for us a little bit more?
Sure. It's the belief by Christians that God has given the land of the Canaanites to the Jewish people. This is repeated 1,000 times in the Old Testament, and it's all over the New Testament as well. And that second part, being in the New Testament, is what even a lot of Christian Zionists are not aware of. So let me give a little evidence of that, Congressman. Jesus, in Matthew 5:17 and 18, says that every stroke of the pen in the law and the prophets, and that was a Jewish shorthand for the whole Old Testament, is given by God. Every stroke of the pen. Now, that's an extraordinary statement. He didn't say just part of it, but every stroke of the pen. So, for instance, the Old Testament promise that is stated most starkly in Genesis 17, verse 8, God says to Abraham, I am giving all the land of Canaan, all of it, to you and your seed. And that means all of your sons and grandsons, etc., for an everlasting possession. So this promise is repeated 1,000 times in the Old Testament. And Jesus is saying that was that those words were inspired by God. In fact, 1 Peter 1 suggests that it was the Spirit of Jesus that inspired all the writers of the Old Testament. So Jesus himself, in some sense, is repeating these 1,000 times the land promise. And then, many people, many Christians who deny Christian Zionism, who deny the land promise and say it's not in the New Testament, they turn to Matthew 5:5, the Beatitudes, as proof for their denial of Christian Zionism. And that's the Beatitude where Jesus said, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. But that Greek word there for earth, gay, can also be translated land. And it turns out more and more scholars are realizing that it turns out that Jesus is quoting word for word Psalm 37:11. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the land. Now that phrase, inherit the land, is repeated 5 times in Psalm 37. And all scholars of the Old Testament, they all agree that the best translation of the Hebrew word there is land, and is referring to the land of Israel. So Jesus is really affirming the land promise in that beatitude. He's not talking about all the earth. He's simply talking about the land of Israel. Now, Paul, I was told by my New Testament professors at the University of Chicago and at the University of Iowa that Paul does not believe in the land promise anymore. So you can imagine my surprise when years ago I came upon Luke telling about Paul's sermon in a synagogue in Antioch Pisidia, that's modern day Turkey, which was more than 20 years, maybe 25 years after Paul's conversion. So it wasn't simply a leftover from his pre-conversion days, but he still believes it and is teaching it 20 to 25 years later, where he tells this synagogue in modern day Turkey, after destroying 7 nations in the land of Canaan, so Paul is not embarrassed by, he's not ashamed of the conquest of Canaan, God gave this people, Israel, their land as an inheritance. You couldn't be more clear. Paul could not have been more clear. And then same thing in the letter to the Hebrews. The author says God led Abraham to a place to receive as an inheritance. And Isaac and Jacob were heirs with him of the same promise. That's Hebrews 11. And then in Hebrews 7, Deacon Stephen says God promised to give Abraham this land as a possession and to his offspring after him. So there you have it. It's all over the New Testament, the land promise as concrete biblical evidence of Christian Zionism.
Wow, fascinating discussion there. I was not aware that it was mentioned over 1,000 times in the Old Testament and so much in the New as well. So real quickly, we've only got a little over a minute left, but what's your take then on how support for Israel among evangelicals has changed, especially over the last couple of years?
It's because evangelicals are not reading the Bible anymore. If they read the Bible, that would not be true. And particularly younger evangelicals are not reading the Bible, and they're listening to podcasts too much. They need to get rid of their cell phones and get their books out.
I couldn't agree with you more. Thank you so much, Dr. Gerald McDermott, the Distinguished Professor of Theology at Jerusalem Seminary. Fascinating discussion. Thank you so much for joining us on Washington Watch, and wishing you and yours a wonderful Merry Christmas.
Thank you, Congressman. My pleasure.